Well, they've really screwed me up because they just shifted it from nice platform 9 over to platform 5. Behind me is a cross-country service that's just run nearly 300 miles from Plymouth up to York, and it's on its way to Edinburgh. There's a problem though. 1, 2, 3, 4 coaches. Cross-country run the longest intercity services in the UK, at the same time as running some of the shortest intercity trains in the UK. This is a problem. And is it a problem we can fix? Can we fix all of cross-country's woes with new trains, with longer trains? How long can the trains get on the routes? These are questions we're going to be answering tonight. But the biggest thing we're going to be looking at is, fundamentally, how do you fix cross-country? The answer might well be that to fix the cross-country services in the UK, you actually need to get rid of cross-country altogether. Everyone, welcome to tonight's Rail Natter. And as the Intercity 225 fades away. Hello everyone, good evening, welcome. It's me with recently departed baby sweat still attached to me, little sweet pea. We're getting there with with sorting ourselves out on the being organised front. We are getting there. Yes, we come to cross-country. I have a soft spot for cross-country. Yes, this is an episode I've been wanting to do for a long time. Not least because I think that, the refurb of the Voyagers, the branding looks good, mostly because I'm a sucker for putting the logo on the train bigly. But they're smart enough inside. I've been travelling on them for a very long time, years and years and years. In fact, a sizable chunk of these experiences have, however, been like this: sat in a vestibule, looking mildly dishevelled. Unfortunately, a lot of other people have had experiences like this. Indeed, that is reflected in the overall public's view of cross-country as a service. Because Transport Focus, who coordinate the Rail Passenger Experience Survey, have highlighted this fact from the most recent iteration of its studies. Cross-country is the worst performing train operator in a survey of 100,000 rail passengers, with only 79% of passengers satisfied. For comparison, LNER has 93% satisfaction, Avanti has 86% satisfaction. So we're going to come back to those figures shortly, because they are one of the main ways that we can understand what the public feel about different operators, and are therefore a very good way of understanding overall quality. Actually, it's one of the things that, as GPR rises, will be more difficult for people to discern. We'll have to think of new ways for them to understand people's journeys, rather than saying the operator. It'll probably be the route. Anyway, cross-country have a business plan. But frankly, it says very little. Yes, this is the publicly publishable summary, but the plan says very little, and frankly, there is only so much that cross-country can actually do anyway. And really, this is a bigger question than one quite relatively small train operator. Cross-country is runs massive services in terms of the distance, but relatively speaking, compared to the GTRs of the world, it's a fairly small operator. There's only so much they can do. Before we get into that, though, we do have to answer the question: what is cross-country? What is one of those? What indeed is it? Before we do that, we'll leave this picture of a nice Class 47 up. We'll come back to this question momentarily. But while we have that 47, in fact, you know what? Let's breathe through a big face, because we need to make the most of the fact that these rail nets have very yellow and orange, aren't I? We need to make the most of the fact that these are live, and I can say hello to all of you, because it's nice to do that. Hello. Let's see. Michael C. laughing at my mic use, and it's still doing that scratchy thing, which I've not worked out how to fix yet. And it annoys me. Don't worry, everyone. I do hear it when it happens. It's annoying, and I have no way. I've not clocked how it is yet. And unfortunately, for shots like that, you don't get to do multiple takes. Although actually I recorded 3 different versions of that with CrossCountry Trains whizzing left, right and centre. CrossCountry should never have withdrawn their HSTs. No, they should have, because the HSTs were hopelessly unsafe, and I'm glad they're gone and they were falling to bits. Don't forget to @ me, by the way, so I can see your comments in the chat. Did it start under BR still? Oh, it started long before British Rail. We'll get to that momentarily. How come I've not had especially bad experiences on cross-country between Newport and Birmingham? Yeah, between Newport and Birmingham, are they running voyages on that, or are you on like a 170 going via Cheltenham? I can't exactly remember what the service looks like for that one. I honestly can't remember. I think it is. Anyway, that's a slightly quieter service, but yeah, it's not great. Mustache rubbing on the microphone, Greg, possibly. Yes, it could be. Yeah, people have mixed experience. I mean, the range of experiences is mixed. It's used by a lot of people doing like a lot of long distance travel that is not premier high experience, first class type travel happens on cross country. Students rely on it very heavily. Families rely on cross country very heavily. People who want to go on holiday are traveling up to Scotland or down to the southwest. It's a very, very popular service. We'll get to that momentarily. Kit Cub, hello. Oh, hello, Kit Cub. Yeah, 2 voyages, 170s, 2 voyages a day each way. Thanks, Kit Cub. Delight to have you along. Hello to all new people in here. Anyway, we should get back to the show, shouldn't we? Me and my extremely yellow, sodiumified yellow face. What's doing that? Anyway, very odd. I look jaundiced. Right, so we must answer the question, what is cross-country? In fact, yes, I do want to answer that question. We must. Sorry, that's me. Am I thinking about how I do clips for this? Yes, I am. We must answer the question: what is cross country? Cross country were operating Class 47 with Mark II coaches until 2002. This is the version of cross country that I first experienced. Actually, going across the country, some might say in style, behind Britain's best locomotive or diesel locomotive. Certainly, they haven't always looked like this because actually their history runs further back than that even, which we'll get to momentarily. Definitionally, though, cross-country services in Britain are intercity services that avoid London. That is the definition. Today's operating contract excludes Transpennine Express, though, which operates between some of the UK's largest cities in the north. So it depends on how you classify Transpennine services. I consider those to be intercity services. They are considered regional services in lots of classifications, which is incorrect because I would describe Manchester and Leeds as 2 of the UK's largest cities, and therefore express services that call at very non-stop or only stop in Huddersfield and a couple of other stations that go between those cities are by definition intercity services that are avoiding London. And indeed, they have previously been classified under BR for a while. They were classified as cross-country services, but they are their own franchise. In any case, that is what it is. Essentially, long-distance intercity services that don't go to London. Broadly north-south, perhaps, is a way to look at it, although, as we'll see in a minute, that's also not quite true. Not least as fundamentally they are going from the southwest to the northeast, by and large. The current operation can be split into 5 operational groups, if you like. So the primary cross-country route has been in operation in basically this form since 1921. Even just in advance of grouping in 1923, the threat of imminent mass reform actually encouraged the fairly fragmented rail industry that we had in the late 1910s to actually get its act together and run a coherent long-distance service. And it looked broadly like this. It went up from the northeast of Scotland on North British tracks down to the southwest, down onto the Great Western, as it was. Yeah, so yeah, you can see that is a pretty substantial route. We don't have Aberdeen to Penzance services anymore, which is a real shame. I was briefly on the last one, very briefly. I know a few people in the chat were as well. Kit Cub, I guess you might have been. Michael C, I know you were. Quite a few others of you on that journey. So doing that. So I was travelling, my first trip was travelling from Exeter or Tiverton up to Aberdeen or vice versa, or from Cardiff or from Bristol up to Aberdeen. Actually, most of it was Cardiff, but certainly my first journeys were from the southwest upwards. And that's a huge route and includes a lot of cities. Like, it's substantial. But there are other major routes. The Newcastle to Reading route, the one that you always want to get on if you're going to Derby and you want to avoid the slowness of Leeds. You always want to get this one. The Via Donny train is always more valuable. So yeah, York through, unless you accidentally get on that one where you're supposed to be recording with ITV in Leeds. Oops. Anyway, so that's also a major north-south corridor. It doubles up the capacity through from Birmingham up to the northeast, which is absolutely necessary. The next grouping is Manchester to Bournemouth, or vice versa. So kind of going through the Southampton megalopolis up through into the northwest. Again, these are extremely valuable corridors. You have the Cardiff to Birmingham beyond to Nottingham route here, which we were alluding to earlier. And we have got the Stansted Airport services as well, which I would describe as not necessarily intercity services. I would say this isn't an intercity service. I'd describe this as a regional service, but it is tying Cambridge, Stansted across to, it's kind of essentially tying Anglia across to the West Midlands. So, these are fairly heavily used routes. If I list off the major, the cities in the UK or the urban areas in the UK that are larger than, or should I say Britain rather than the UK, but certainly in contiguous Britain, that are larger than 500,000 people, London at the top of the list, Greater Manchester above the West Midlands, above Brum, then of these, how many of these cities are operated into by CrossCountry? Well, it's almost all of them. Manchester, Birmingham, Leeds, Glasgow, Sheffield, the South Hampshire megalopolis, Tyneside. It's not a megalopolis, isn't it? It's a conurbation. It'd be fun if it was a megalopolis. Albert Stanley says it's a megalopolis. Tyneside, Bristol, Cardiff, Edinburgh, Nottingham, Leicester. Technically the Tees Valley if you're counting Darlow as the hub, but I would always say it's Middlesbrough and or Stockton. But anyway, yeah, so it's going through almost all of these. Arguably, if you're looking at Darlow as the hub, then you could say it's also going through Tees Valley. So that's a substantially, this is the main way that most of Britain's cities are connected with each other. And this is reflected in the scale of the operations. So in terms of passenger kilometres, there are nearly 70 billion passenger kilometres across all train operating companies in the most recent data. Nearly 30 or 28 billion are for intercities. So that's 40-ish, 41% of all of the passenger kilometres travelled. Not passenger journeys, but passenger kilometres travelled. So in terms of people actually bums on seats, 40% are on long-distance services. So rail occupies a substantial part of the long-distance market. I put an asterisk there because that's split by talk rather than actual journey. We'll get into some of these semantics later. Cross-country is 3.5 billion of those. You might think, well, that's not that much. But that is still a substantial percentage of passenger kilometres. And you can see the trace over time there. So you can see is above 3, climbing towards 4, then COVID hit, and then climbing pretty rapidly straight back up again. Indeed, the figures are on the up and up. If you go back to our episode where we were looking at overcrowding on the railway, you'll know that cross-country is one of the most overcrowded on the network. Nowadays, the services are mostly, but not entirely, run by Voyagers. For anyone who doesn't know, this is a diesel multiple unit. It's a high-speed diesel multiple unit. They are, I would say they're good units with a terrible interior layout. They are... Also, you can go back to our Tilting Trains episode if you want to know the history of these trains, because it's kind of fun where they came from. What that means is that all services run by CrossCountry are diesel services, despite a substantial percentage of the operation being under the wires, as it were, under overhead electrification. And you might then be asking, what are CrossCountry's problems? This is key. So what are those problems? The problems are, firstly, extremely high cancellation rates. 1 in 15 services actually get cancelled. The reason for this, well, there's a few reasons. I'm going to go through each of these, kind of break down some of those reasons. So, one of the first reasons is that CrossCountry has very long routes with high exposure to delays and limited chance for recovery on long routes run by a limited pool of trains. It has a long-term, it has had a long-term lack of backroom infrastructure spend in terms of organisation, lots of other things like that. Actually the infrastructure to keep things operating on a backroom perspective. And really the main reason for this is it has a substantial lack of spare staff or trains. Drivers are retiring faster than they can be trained. Trains are tired. And high-speed diesel multiple units are inherently unreliable compared to their electric competitors, or rather compared to what should be considered an actual modern high-speed train, which is a fully electric one. The next issue is that it has severe punctuality problems. Trains are late. 72% of stops are made in within 3 minutes, but that means a substantial percentage are beyond 3 minutes from the scheduled calling time. Now, why is that? Well, fragmented operational control across these lines run across multiple network rail routes and regions. Well, that fragmented operational control makes or can make recovery difficult. I'm sure there have been some improvements on that front of late, but inherently the fragmented nature of Network Rail as it currently is, and that's not going to improve under GBR, makes recovery difficult. CrossCountry relies very heavily on Birmingham New Street, and this is one of the major sources of punctuality because it is one of the key bottlenecks on the British railway network, and indeed the European railway network, because it's one of the most intensely congested railway hubs in Europe. The station operates at, not under, but at its maximum capacity. And multi-minute delays of even just one long-distance service can throw the day's timetable out completely. The next issue with punctuality is, again, coming back to those long routes. They are long routes, they have high exposure to delays, and there is, therefore, a limited chance for recovery. But the last reason is that there are short trains being run on this service, very short trains. Now, short trains that are oversubscribed means that you have very long boarding times, longer than the train is scheduled, which means that if you have even slight overcrowding on that train, particularly if it is a 4-car service with a limited number of doors, that train will sit inherently every single stop where there is large numbers of people getting on and off the train. It will lose time, and it will lose time, and it will lose more time. The third issue is chronic overcrowding. All of this leads to that problem. The high cancellation rates, the severe punctuality issues, those all compound chronic overcrowding. But there are other issues that feed into this problem as well. The first deep one is a massive underallocation of trains by the Department for Transport. A lack of trains actually being given to CrossCountry to run its service. It is running on a very tight number of trains to start with. Also, again, as a result of the way the DFT set the franchise up originally, it has very long train leasing contracts with the rolling stock operating companies. That's the train landlords, which limits the options for CrossCountry to do anything about this in the short and medium term. It is, hanging over CrossCountry is a rapidly diminishing number of high-speed diesel units, which is, obviously not helped by electrification being shit-canned across the country. So it doesn't have many options to add to its fleet. There's already discussions that supposedly some of the Voyagers that were being operated on the West Coast that have now been replaced by newer IEP, Hitachi units. Some of those trains that were supposed to be coming to CrossCountry to help are actually now being diverted to East Midlands to fix some of their problems. Now, East Midlands Railways is also one of the ignored intercity operators, so I'm not going to suggest that they're not worthy, but it shows how much these diesel multiple units are in high demand given no one is building new ones. The Voyager fleet itself is, I would say, at least in its internal layout, deeply flawed in its design. And there's this, in terms of how many seats it's designed to have, a massively oversized first class, if indeed there should be first class on the service at all. This is, it has large sections where a shop was taken out. It's got bizarre arrangements in terms of its luggage. Bike storage is hopeless, but still is arranged in such a way that it takes up a lot of space. They are very badly designed in terms of their interiors. The way that the disabled area is laid out is really poor, and not just in terms of optimizing space, but also for disabled passengers. It's just they're not very well designed internally, which creates a nightmare for the poor staff kind of running the train. The other issue is that there is a significant maintenance backlog on these trains, and not necessarily just in terms of their major mechanicals, engines, traction units, so on and so on, but actually in their interiors, functioning doors, toilets, fittings, lights. All of these things are tired. These trains are often, even if there are available trains, they're out of service, meaning that the number of double formed services where they attach two of them together to increase the size of the train and get more seats within that path, even that falls down, even when this has been timetabled. And even refurbishments cannot resolve this. Fundamentally, high-speed diesel multiple units are inherently unreliable. They are, by comparison to electric trains, they require substantially higher cost maintenance. They are more unreliable. They require a shorter amount of time before services. Not having pure electric intercity services causes these kinds of problems. And despite all of this, as we've alluded to earlier, travel is booming away from London, which leads CrossCountry to have some of the highest passenger growth in the country, close to LNER and East Midlands, making crowding even worse. There's lots of discussion about some of the challenges. Don't forget how every toilet is a disabled toilet when there's only 2 wheelchair spaces on the train, so other 2 toilets are just a waste of space. More seats in a 3-car 170 than a 4-car Voyager, says Kit Cub. Yeah, absolutely. We'll get into some of those seat numbers momentarily. When all of this piles up and goes wrong, CrossCountry are also ranked worst at how they both manage delays and communicate issues and solutions. As all of you watching this will know, over the weekend, we have a classic example in the form of a total system collapse. We'll cover this in a bit more detail in the news. But the response to this from a comms perspective was dreadful. I'll read this out here. I might well editorialise ever so slightly. An anonymous CrossCountry spokesperson said, "Our key priority is now to restore as close to a normal service as possible for our customers tomorrow. With most facilities now reinstated, we are planning to operate a very limited number of services from around 6 this evening, primarily on routes towards Leicester and Derby. Planning is underway to support a full train service on Monday, and we are working closely with National Grid and industry partners as recovery efforts continue. We would like to thank our customers for their patience and understanding during today's disruption." There is a statement like this should have two things in it in modern comms, because those two things are critical to show that you're actually engaging and interested in solving the problem, and that someone is taking some level of responsibility and is accountable for this and will answer for why it happened and address those problems long term. Those two things are, firstly, this sort of a statement should include an apology. Is there an apology here? No, just a thanks for your patience. Thanks for your patience. Second issue, this should not be coming from a CrossCountry spokesperson. This should be a named person in the organisation. If not the boss, then at least an ops manager or someone very senior in the organisation. This should not be an anonymous CrossCountry spokesperson. This is extremely poor public comms, extremely poor. Fundamentally, though, I think it is reasonable to say that CrossCountry's biggest issue, as we've gone through all those, if we've gone through those three problems of cancellations, punctuality, and overcrowding, biggest issue by far, it's the trains. Talking of which, I'll go on, Ross.
If I'm investing in a high reach stacker, I want to get a train with like 60 or 70 containers in. I don't want to have one loose container coming in. That's a lot of money to waste in order to, there's no practical use of this technology as it is currently advertised. It doesn't make any sense. It's very, very much investor story time here. Oh, it moves containers real fast. F you.
You just listened to a short clip from the latest episode of Trains Atlantic, the podcast about trains that tries to say everything you've not heard everywhere else. To get the full show sent your way every month, subscribe via trainsatlantic.uk. The fact is, these things have been around for 25 years and they have been absolutely hammered. Because of its lack of electrification plan, the DFT, the Department for Transport, have doubled down and spent £75 million on a fleet refurb. Now, that's good for Alstom, and I'm glad that is supporting Alstom, providing them a bit of work. Frankly, independent of whether these get replaced imminently or not, they are long overdue a refurb. There are other reasons why the DFT have doubled down on the Voyagers, though. The DFT probably don't want to do fleet procurement in the middle of, or imminently at the point where CrossCountry is going to be absorbed into GBR. The last thing you want in the middle of an organisational handover is also to be dealing with the procurement of trains. That's extremely complex. Compared to other diesel fleets, the Voyagers are actually pretty mechanically reliable. They might well have other faults and flaws internally, but broadly they are, follow the modern railways golden spanner system, they are a reliable fleet. And more so given the reliability issues with new fleets like the Hitachis, which means that, the DFT are sort of nervous about getting rid of them. The potential is that something worse will actually come along from a reliability perspective. Thing is, all of this gives us an opportunity. That is a chance to think about a new fleet, because the boldest, quickest way to resolve many of these issues is to buy a new train fleet as soon as possible. The UK's best intercity trains are the Class 745 Stadler Flirts. They aren't 125 mile an hour capable, but Stadler would be able to make that happen. I have reasonably well assured that it wouldn't be the 745s, there would be some mechanical changes made to these vehicles to get them up to 125, but it would be possible for this design. There are also, of course, the Hitachi IP derivatives. This is a picture of some 802s, the latest version Well, let's not talk about the 810s, but the latest reliable version is the 807s, essentially just a direct derivative of the original Intercity Express program fleet. Of course, Hitachis are no longer particularly popular, and as a company, I would say not hugely popular either. I have it on good authority, however, that Alstom would be able to offer a level boarding capable electric or bi-mode version of their new Odessia platform that can run at 125, should the market conditions make that a thing they might want to do. It's possible. Am I interested in that as a fleet option? Well, it can't be worse than the 810, can it? There are problems for a new fleet, though. The cross-country network covers a tremendous variety of routes, so finding an off-the-shelf bi-mode that fits the specific platform clearances, structure clearances, OLE restrictions, etc. across all these regions has been difficult, and would be difficult without commissioning a completely bespoke, highly expensive fleet. I think we're at the point, though, now where we've enough of a uniform fleet on most of this network, like most of the bits of this network now, that I think these limitations should be considered sort of somewhat ameliorated and rather political instead of engineering problems. You know, I would say you can fix most of these. From a gauge clearance perspective, for example, I think we're at the point now where we've got the 807s kind of cracked. 26-metre cars, you know, the length of the vehicle does cause challenges from an end throw and a centre throw perspective, from a gauge clearance perspective. Shorter units, so going from 26 to 25, 24 metres could resolve that. Going down to 23 metres even could resolve that. There are different ways to pick that up, I think. There is one challenge that clever mechanical engineering cannot fix, though, and that is limited train lengths. Right. Before we talk about limited train lengths, I want to chat to everyone a little bit because let's go big face. So what's going on here? So Raphael's going, Odessia. Cologne is getting its new S-Bahn trains from that platform. Yeah. They're out and about there. They're mostly as like regional or suburban services, but we're going to explain the problems with train lengths momentarily. But what's wrong with the 805? Gareth is saying, well, it's the 805 is just not as advanced as the 807, right? Ketkub is saying a 222 is basically a Mark II attempt at a Voyager, non-compatible electrical systems, though internally, though, they're better in almost every way. Yeah, the 222s, the East Midlands 222s are like very obviously substantially better. I mean, they feel much roomier. The interior design, not just the body sides being parallel, but they just feel much better as units. They just actually are they parallel? Have I just made that up? I might have made that up. They might still have exactly the same rake, tumble down as the Voyagers. In any case, just a much roomier internal design. So a video of one leaking from the roof ceiling. It says Right Beanie Baby. Yeah, fair point. 222s aren't parallel. Thanks, Katie. Yeah, you're right. No, Katie would know because that's your train that you take all the time, right? Yeah. They are. Yes, they are. The 222s are great, and I think the challenge with them, of course, is that they're diesel. They are diesel. They can only be so good compared to an electric train, such as their acceleration and so on, and so on. People are saying they actually love a 222. Yeah, well, Scotland's getting them, aren't they? So tremendous. Lumo's nicked a couple somehow. But generally, yeah. Let's see. So Ben Thompson and others, you're second guessing me on the train length issue. We're going to go into some detail on that because it's a really, really key point. So for cross-country, train length is a serious problem. And I note that I'm saying train length rather than platform length, right? Here, not all of them, but in terms of the long-distance routes that I would say you can consolidate into considering as intercity, these are all of the platforms. And I believe are the platform lengths, the maximum platform lengths available through there. You can see there's some pretty substantial variation there. You can see, Cooper, 150 metres, Torquay, 163 metres, 156 metres at Camborne. Again, people can validate this. This is me doing a quick sort of program scan. Will Deakin, hello, Will. If you're out there, I know you did some work for me on this, and I bloody well couldn't find the Excel spreadsheet. Could I? In any case, it would have been outdated because sometimes platforms get extended and fixed. In any case, the challenges from this mean that, yes, a 93-metre long 4-car Class 220 can fit fine, but as soon as you start looking at longer trains, you start having problems, So, huge variation in platform lengths on the proper cross-country. Now, you might ask, hey, but haven't we fixed that? Haven't we fixed, longer trains on shorter platforms. And you'd sort of be right, because, to a significant extent, this can be resolved using SDO or ASDO, that is selective door opening. That's where the train automatically locks out part of the, a number of the doors centrally, locks them out so they don't open, thanks to track-mounted balises. You can see SDO balises here. There's the long, thin one. If you've ever wondered what that is, that's what it is. It's a selective door opening balise. There's a couple of other ones down there. ETCS can do some of this stuff automatically as well. There's various ways and means that technology picks it up. That's SDO. It works most on a system of track balises which tell the train where it is and which doors it needs to lock out. Solved problem, right? Wrong. Even at the major hub stations, there are severe limitations on what train lengths can operate. At New Street itself, for example, longer trains would prevent the use of the split platforms, which you'll notice is a lot of them. The split platforms are completely critical to keeping station capacity at the levels they need to be at to avoid almost the whole British railway network collapsing. Frankly, it's a similar story at Manchester Piccadilly. Again, other major stations, there are similar restrictions, such as at Newcastle, where there are limits on the length of the bay platforms. And if you excluded cross-country services, terminating cross-country services from these, that would force them to park for a while on the through tracks on the East Coast Main Line, obliterating capacity there. So things are challenging at the major hubs. The story doesn't necessarily get that much easier at the little stations, because some of the platforms are so short that ASDO, selective door opening, cannot actually be applied because too many doors would be closed to actually enable safe evacuation of a train if there was a fire or if it had to stop at that station for emergency reasons and get everyone off the train. In other cases, longer trains would overhang level crossings, or they'd stick their noses out, or indeed multiple coaches out over switches and crossings, making the operation through these stations of longer trains unsafe other than in exceptional circumstances. Meaning scenes like this of a, 2 coupled 5-car Voyagers giving us 10 coaches, they're operationally impossible. The most we can cope with is a 250-metre long 9-car Voyager. My understanding is that the 9-car Voyager can operate on essentially all of those long-distance north-south routes. 250 metres is the longest that you can run. So let's take that as our ceiling, because it does leave us some options. This means that let's get my old scribbly pen out. 250 meters here, 250 meter Voyager combo gives us 432 seats. These are not well designed interiors, so that even though they feel cramped when you're sat in them, there are not many seats. Kit Cub, I'm looking forward to your thoughts on this. So if we went for a 10-car Class 745, because of the way that those vehicles are split up, you have to go from multiple to 2, and even if you added one extra car by somehow magic, you'd still be exceeding the 215 number, meaning that a 745, it wouldn't be a 745 by the way, but let's nominally say some derivative of it, gives you a whopping 631 seats, also with a bar car and much more bike space. They are excellent long-distance trains and should be the blueprint for anything in the future. 32% extra seats. So off the bat, you're getting almost a third additional capacity. And that's compared to the 9-car. So if you then look at what the average number of seats are, if you're running, 200 seats in a 4-car? It's a smaller number of seats. If you're looking at the 4-car train, it's much, it's a massive increase a reliable increase in seats. This is why, by the way, I should say, any new fleet should not be short formed and then you double them up. You should have the longest trains, and then what you can do when they're a little bit quieter, as they run down to beyond Plymouth or whatever, or up to Aberdeen, that's when you can clean them. That's when they're quiet. That's when you can get the Hoover out and clean those empty coaches and clean some of those coaches. Do some of that tidying up before it lands at its terminating spot. What about the HS2 895s? Those actually, they're not going to be 8-car. They're going to be 10-car because DFT whoopsies. But say the original spec of the HS2 train fleet. That's the 895s. Let's go for the Class 895. 8-car would have been 200 meters long. Theoretically 504 seats. So again, that fits within the 250 meters. 504 seats is not as much of an uplift, but it's 14% again above the 9-car 221. It's not too bad. What about an 807? An 8-car 807 here. Well, it's 207 meters, which means that from a passenger density perspective, you're making better use of the space, because you've got nearly 600 seats, but reasonable level of density. You're getting 140 extra seats, which is a quarter additional, 20, nearly 25% extra capacity, which is pretty good. You'll see down in grey here, I've just pitched in what you've got if you have a 10-car 221. Well, it's 237 metres long, which is too long. Or the 12-car 745, so in its current configuration, ignoring the speed issues, 237 metres as well, coincidentally. You could have nearly 800 seats in a 745. Actually, if you have it in the Stansted Express configuration, it is basically 800 seats, I think. It's a huge number of seats, which is a massive uplift on what you currently have. Nearly 50% again extra seats, but they don't fit. That's the problem. So which would you go for? 10-car Class 745 variant, or maybe an 8-car Class 807 variant? These are some of the options. What are you thinking about future-facing compatibility? What are we going to be doing? How should these trains be looking? I mean, dark blue with a massive white double arrow on it, of course. Anyway, in all cases, the only way we are tackling passengers' serious shortcomings with the cross-country service in the medium term is with a new fleet. But how do we know what passengers want? How do we understand what their priorities are? Well, we used to have the Rail Passenger Satisfaction Survey. Now we have the Rail Passenger Experience Survey. And tonight we will be going through the latest results from this in the bonus. The bonus episode we'll be going through. I think it's a really useful companion to this. We're going to understand what passengers want, how the different operators compare. How do you get access to, the bonus though? Well, Rail Natter changes transport policy for the better, and in supporting the show, you're making that change happen. For as little as £5 a month, you get the free audio version of my best-selling book, How the Railways Will Fix the Future. You get weekly bonus episodes, and you get 2 episodes of Trains Atlantic, the new podcast with me and Justin Rosniak, as well as your problem fame, every single month. That's at least 3 hours of extra content every month, all for 5 crisp British pounds, or your equivalent local currency. Subscribe now. And to some news. The first news is some very sad news. An absolute icon, a transit icon indeed, has passed away. Dolly Parton has died at the age of 80. A hero, a legend, a very outspoken trans ally, and, of course, most importantly, the main operator of public transport in Tennessee, because the Dollywood steam train would carry thousands of passengers on a busy day, which for Tennessee essentially exceeds the public transport of any other ridership of any other operator, and indeed what is one of the largest rail operators in the South. So, an icon, a true icon, and we bid her to ride that steam train in the sky forevermore. She was the best of us. In other news, surely this can't happen again, right? Surely we can't have another collapse of a centralised computer system thanks to a power cut that knocks out trains across the whole... Oh, no, I'm just hearing my ear. We can have that happen again. This time, it was the total collapse of Saturday's, this Saturday just gone's cross-country service, because cross-country put all of their operations... like all of their operations critical IT kit in a late 1950s office block that was heavily rebuilt in 2006. Nothing about either of those decades is good from a building services perspective. Not a great situation, I would say. What's funny is this cross-country episode, Jaden will affirm this in the chat, this cross-country episode was planned way in advance of this week, and CrossCountry gave us a nice bit of news to kind of make the algorithm find us a bit more. So hello to everyone watching this right now, all 250 plus of you watching this cross-country issue. Yeah, the distribution network operator for Birmingham, that's National Grid Electricity Distribution, said, our engineers... Wait a minute, can I do Birmingham? People have asked me to do voices. I'm like, let's offend everyone from Birmingham. Our engineers completed repairs overnight and power has been restored following a fault affecting CrossCountry's Birmingham Control Centre. We know this disruption will have been frustrating for passengers and we're sorry for the inconvenience caused. Yeah, there we go. So, fair enough. Once again, power failures. I would say don't do this. Don't do this. Don't put your business critical functions that stop the railway somewhere just in a random Birmingham office block. That doesn't feel like a good thing. It's funny that the government are now talking about there being a big grand check to make sure that that's not happening. It's like, no, at what point nothing operationally critical should be anywhere other than national critical infrastructure type offices managed accordingly. not least from a hybrid, and sort of cyber attack perspective. Just wowza, not great. Fun enough, though, it was a weekend of the railway at its absolute best because all of the other operators absolutely stepped up. Honestly, you were just seeing all the work being done by frontline staff, cross-country staff themselves trying to work out what the hell to do, but railway staff, frontline staff, and backroom staff across the country, yet again, having to absolutely step up. Now, the DfT haven't said it. I've said in varying means to the DfT directly and behind closed doors that this is a massive PR win and they should be claiming it as such, and also giving a massive morale boost by, rather than claiming credit for trains that aren't theirs, or talking about getting rid of seats that the DfT specified in the first place, they could be going, industry, you stepped up and we thought that was brilliant, and that's exactly the mould in which we want to create Great British Railways. I've yet to see any comms saying those things yet, because the DfT is hopeless on a comms perspective and are absolutely determined to make sure everyone hates GBR before the legislation actually brings it into being. But it is a blueprint for what GBR should be. GBR should be a railway transport system that steps up when it's needed to. At the moment, I would say it's needed to step up for everyone all the time. And that is the best of us. It's the best of the industry. And everyone watching this who works for this country, everyone who is in the industry who was working for LNER or EMR or Avanti or TPE or whoever you're working for, who stepped up and got services running, got passengers moving despite the lack of cross-country services, you're brilliant. You made a lot of people's lives that much less miserable than they might otherwise have been. Because that is a blueprint for GBR. It is a thing that GBR should be striving to do. Indeed, it's also a thing that GBR can absolutely fix with IT co-location, shared backup data and power functions, centralized command, and so on. Essentially, GBR's ability to harness economies of scale are one of the things that make it centralizing its IT and engineering functions, and some of its core operational functions, a good thing, a good idea. But what about cross-country's future? Well, first we have to think about passenger operations as a whole. Whilst there may be some rationality in broadly retaining the structure of the regional or local operators, I don't think that's what should happen, but, whatever. That sort of seems to be the approach for GBR at the moment, hence the extremely long, horrible names on the side of the trains. There is absolutely no sense to be had in retaining the individual intercity operators. None at all. Unifying intercity operations enables, a huge number of different things. It enables a clear service differentiator between intercity and all the rest, forcing a consistent level of quality and experience. Passenger amenities such as train interiors, Wi-Fi, catering, first class, luggage, how luggage is managed, station lounges, etc., can all be standardized nationwide, making it more appealing for customers, and also bringing in economies of scale again in things like supply of food technologies, the fitment of lounges, branding materials, all these things. You get massive economies of scale in having intercity as a single thing. It enables better and more easy fares reform, as you can exclude the single intercity operator from certain types of discount, policy changes, fares levers, or simplification for that matter. You can also introduce specific intercity campaigns, discounts, and so on. You also remove one of the key barriers to new passengers, which is the operator-specific tickets. The horror show of saying, "Oh, you can't use that ticket. We are Avanti West Coast, not West Coast Railways," or whatever it is. You also get the benefit of when things go wrong, you can very easily accommodate disrupted passengers on the rest of the network, as we saw happen over the weekend. You have things like larger pools of drivers, of guards, of train managers, catering staff. Of course, we should be insourcing all of the catering staff, insourcing all of the, particularly backroom catering staff, but insourcing all of the train cleaners as well. Larger pools of all those people, as well as unified working conditions and bargaining for unions, which, by the way, is one of the reasons this is so heavily resisted. Likewise, a larger pool of trains gives many operational flexibilities if standardized across the operator. That doesn't necessarily mean the same trains everywhere, but if you're using trains if you're either buying trains made by broadly the same manufacturers, or are specifying standardization such that the fleet is interchangeable, then that gives you efficiencies in terms of the number of spare trains required to keep services at full pace. If all your trains are the same length or nominally the same length, for example. if you have engineering skills, you can consolidate and kind of have a more efficient pool of engineering skills, but also they can be geographically distributed without too much stress. Depots, the ability to the trains can end up at different depots, and it's fine. If you have disruption, that makes returning the service to normal much easier. And of course, staff. You can have your staff moving around. They can move around if they want to move house for whatever reason. If you've got one person in a household moving house for whatever reason, an in-city staff member can keep working in-city just somewhere else. Of course, you also gain many back-of-house benefits, such as better coordinated rostering, disruption management, comms, as well as efficiencies in management numbers, in training, scale of training. But perhaps most importantly, you recreate the icon of Intercity, a brand that is still well known today, and a brand that can compete with the motorways and with flying. And, by the way, should be retained when we start having dedicated high-speed services in the future too. I talked in episode 314 about how this should also be integrated with the infrastructure. But what infrastructure would actually come under Intercity, and what services would actually fall under the group? How do you slice up the current operators, essentially? Of course, HS2, that's quite straightforward. Well, it's time to bring some graphs up, right? Let's do this. All right, get my medium face up and bring up some Excel spreadsheet action. Right, let's... so, this is work that I've done... for various reasons, but rail latter among them, as well as some other kind of policy work, which is, right, so we've got our more than 500,000 people cities, urban centres, rather. So, right, what are the pairs? If we look at combination pairs of what are the population pairs, which then gives me city pair priorities. So what I've done here, basically, these are listed in order, so it gives me my nice pairs of cities. So this is groups of cities that I think a city of 500,000 plus should have a high-speed intercity connection, high-speed, both lowercase h and s. So there I get my city pairs. So from those city pairs, prioritized in terms of like the larger city, down, we get 105 different city pairs. Now, from the city pairs, we get... well, there they all are. You can see them all there, and also beautifully this is a beautiful spreadsheet, by the way. You should be very proud of it. So what we're seeing here, the different columns, you can see my city pair code, the city pair, so you can actually read it, the origin, the destination, fine. And what I've then done is gone, right, okay, what is the fastest route, the most sensible fast route to connect those two places? Well, the fastest route between London and Manchester is a direct service. Okay, fine. London to the West Midlands. Okay. So what I've done is created service patterns that cover each of these pairs, each of the city pairs, so that for anyone in that city, they get a direct service, they get a direct train to any of the other city pairs. Now, this is a different approach that I've taken before, because I'm broadly in favour of hub and spoke, design of a hub and spoke timetable. So this is a bit of an experiment for me to see if this made sense, this works. Having direct service between all those city pairs. So what this will then allow me to do is say, all right, well, I'm gonna have varying routes that can deliver all of these pairs, the city pairs, which then gives me, the groupings of different patterns of city, which then gives me a series of route codes. So what I get to connect up all of 105 city pairs, you only need 35 separate diagrams, if you like. A diagram is the word that we use to describe a route that a train takes. So a separate diagram. You only need 35 of them. And I've kind of grouped these nominally according to the current intercity sort of contracts as they are, what were called the franchises. So you've got a West Coast one, you've got an East Coast one, a Midland one, there is a South Hampshire direct to London one, Great Western, Transpennine, CrossCountry. Now that you might be interested by the Hope Valley and the Wessex ones, those, perhaps for a future episode. But you can see there that each of these routes, they're again in order of like the cities that they connect up. So the higher population ones, therefore probably the ones that are going to have highest loading and are, you'd argue, premier. Well, you can see that some of those high up first ones here, they just serve one city pair. But as you go down, some of these start serving substantial numbers of city pairs. There's no coincidence that the cross-country, the ones that are nominally on the current cross-country route within this, are connecting up the majority, a sizable number of cities. Indeed, the Bristol version, and I'll show you what these actually are momentarily, what I'm calling IC 7.1, is connecting up 11 of the total city pairs. So it's a huge number of the city pairs all connected up very nicely. The next question becomes, of course, What? What is that? What are you on about, man? Big shout out to Rybini Baby, thanks for the tenor. Off topic, but out of interest, how difficult would it be to retrofit trains with a level boring system like the 555s and the 777s have, which is like an automatic ramp that extends or raises? Actually, the ramp doesn't extend or raise, it's just a gap filler. But what the clever thing about the Stadler trains there, including the 745s, by the way, is that they just have a low floor. They've got a floor that's designed at the platform level. The national standard platform level. Retrofitting that onto cross-country train would probably involve inserting a newly designed coach. I think retrofitting it would be such a massive engineering job on the existing trains that it'd be with 25 years of corrosion, it'd be very challenging. You just look at the extensive, the cost potentially to the point of sinking the organisation that Wabtec in Doncaster had to go to fit plug doors onto some plug doors, but actually sliding doors into the Mark IIIs, for cross-country and for other operators. That was a huge bit of work because every single Mark III coach was different and had a huge amount of corrosion in it. I think you'd find a similar story on those cross-country DMUs that get soaked in salty water all the time. Good question, though. If you want me to just stop everything mid-rail matter, a good way to do that is to chuck me one of the fancy YouTube here is money things. I will answer your question immediately because it's bright yellow and you've paid me to. Anyway, so it's time to get up some maps as we draw towards the end of this episode, because you might be going, oh, what does that all look like? Well, it looks like this, folks. It looks like this. These are our city pairs manifested in the form of our all of the routes that should be considered premier intercity routes. Now, some of these you probably kind of expect. So, for example, let's turn all these off and let's turn on, for example, the West Coast group. So you'd say, oh yeah, that's mostly this is not identical to the current West Coast thing, but this is broadly routes that are on following the West Coast main line. You'd say, oh yeah, that looks about what I'd expect to see. There's a little bit more going on between Liverpool and Manchester to get you those direct connections all round, but yeah, that makes some sense. What then about the East Coast group? Again, you'd say, oh yeah, that looks about what I'd expect. Fine, yeah, cool, okay. And then we get the Midland group. So Midland group here, well, slightly different because I'm saying the Midland group also extends up through Edinburgh across to Glasgow, indeed, and runs into Tees Valley as well. So you'd say, oh, okay, right, yeah, fine, okay, that's fair enough. Yeah, Midland, slightly different, but okay, understandable, using the Midland Main Line. The South Hampshire one, that's more new, right? That's something like, wait, what's that? Yes, what is that? This is the fact that the South Hampshire conurbation should have a proper high speed, not a bloody third rail 90 mile an hour screaming along with sparks flying everywhere service, but an actual high speed service. Whether that means some form of upgrade, yes is the answer, it does. But that should be a priority for dedicated high speed services, certainly improving the current service. So that's probably something new that would be intercity branded. What else though? So that's the South Hampshire. Great Western, well, it's what you'd expect. By the way, what this would mean is for each of these, what I'm saying is for the current operators, you strip out all of the services that are not on this, and they are no longer intercity services. They become regional services, they become part of the Transport for England service mesh. But you prioritise these and these only as being part of the intercity grouping. So yeah, that's direct to Bristol and direct to Cardiff. What you do about trains those intercity trains that continue on to the fringes, well, that's for a future episode. What then about, let's look at Transpennine. Well, Transpennine, for me, yes, great. Those are absolutely running the core Transpennine route, but also they're going up to Scotland as well. I consider those to be a key, that they need all those services should run to Scotland. Then the cross-country ones. This is where I say you see a very familiar route here running this. I think this is where I need to then add the other services, because the Hope Valley route, the Hope Valley services, are ones that are not on the cross-country route currently, but you can suddenly see that's critical for connecting the East Midlands and South Yorkshire across to Manchester and up into Scotland. So that gives you the grouping here. What's also important about that is it's giving you an proper intercity service using the Hope Valley. So that is 4 groups, by the way, that use the Hope Valley there, that I think that suddenly prioritises the Hope Valley, which is hopelessly under capacity for what it needs. The other thing you get then is the Wessex grouping. Now, the Wessex grouping, you might go, wait, what's that? That looks very cross-country. It's just because, yes, it kind of is. And actually, the Wessex grouping, as I'm calling it, is substantial. It's partly because of the importance of this connecting up to, not to Bournemouth, by the way, you'll notice, but that's because Bournemouth isn't the sizable city that South Hampshire is. But, you could do things about that, TFE regional hub. That's where you put the hub and spoke story in. But that also means serious upgrades needed on the connection up to Bristol, right? The other challenge is I think the only reversals I've got on this map are at Bristol. Bristol is a bit of a mess operationally. We should maybe have thought about that before redeveloping some of the land around here. But anyway, and across to Cardiff. So the Wessex group suddenly is pretty substantial in terms of what it does. But it gets you, the Wessex group is instrumental in giving you those direct pairs that aren't necessarily provided by the others. So if you group in all of those, I would say suddenly you start seeing what the cross-country map looks like. But actually, more importantly, what the overall intercity map looks like. I think that is, again, okay, yes, you're going to be looking then at potentially extending some of these, depending on what you could do diagrammatically, to Swansea and beyond, down to the southwest, up to Aberdeen, up to Inverness. Yes, there are some extensions you would be doing, but that is the intercity network, right? Now, let me get my face in the right place. Yes, so that's the map. And, we need to stop essentially thinking of cross-country as an isolated operator and integrate it into the in-city network, the in-city system as a whole. We have a total intercity operator that is familiar. People know what they're getting. The standard, the quality is the same across the country, and it is a single unified competitive brand, because that's where things get exciting, right? Having that unified intercity high-speed brand, things get really interesting. In this episode, we have teased an intercity operator that is integrated and the services that they would cover. We have got 2 more episodes coming up on this front. The first is looking at the in-city operator in more detail, what routes they'd cover, a bit more on that map, what that looks like in terms of services, your average speeds on those different routes to see which ones need more work, the fleets, what kind of fleet you'd need, changes to infrastructure, and ultimately how that influences the shape of our Rail Natter episode 222 high-speed network. And then the next episode we'll do is episode 333. 333 will revisit and update the 222 network in line with all of this, but looking more closely at how you deliver it in terms of construction priorities, where you'd split it up and integrate it with existing main lines, and what that gives us for the future. In the meantime, let me know what you think about all of this. Would you miss cross-country? What do you think about the options for the new fleet? What about that wider intercity network? I will see you Patreon folk for the bonus. To everyone else, good night. Of course, we cannot end episode 318 without talking about the Class 318. These units, not a huge amount to say about these uniquely, other than the fact that they were delivered bright orange, or should I say, what was Strathclyde Crimson or whatever, I don't know, Strathclyde Red or whatever it is, the euphemism for orange, screw the orange order. Anyway, units were introduced. These lovely trains, not that many of them, they were introduced in late 1986 as part of the electrification of the Ayrshire coastline between Glasgow, Ayr and Ardrossan. And basically they're just 3-car 317s, replacing a bunch of knackered DMUs. What's fun about these, they're blunt-ended and look tired, but they actually could run at 90 miles an hour. I bet running along in these at 90 was entertaining. Their use was extended to Largs in January 1987, and the trains wanted to go even further, though, because a 318 attempted to extend the line beyond Largs in 1995. Thankfully, in the early hours, they were trying to be cheeky, which meant that nobody was about, and so there were only minor injuries. But this somewhat demolished Largs station took a decade to fix, and also obliterated Lynn's wool shop. Absolutely catastrophic. what can I say? Fit better buffers. Watch episode 99. Cheerio. Bye. Bye.